This will be part 2 in the lesson on natural selection. We'll again use our stick insects as our example. We ended with some key points, and you can pause it here if you want to refresh your memory. But this was our scenario. We have the parental generation here, and then we have the offspring produced. And we noted that there are variations in lots of different kinds of traits, and we were focusing on body shape. That body shape might provide better camouflage under certain conditions. So here we're going to continue. It is reproduction that is producing this variation. The variations are the differences that might make a difference to survival. So it's important to note that without any variation, no individual would have an advantage due to that variation. So natural selection requires variation in a population. Now we'll dig a little deeper. Reproduction produces random variation. And this sort of means that the variation is independent of what would be useful for the members of the species. Another way to think about that is whatever is producing the variation doesn't know what would be good for the species. So notice the parents here are having offspring. Most of the offspring will inherit parental traits, but there will be departures from that body shape. Some will be thinner, some will be thicker. Whatever's producing this variation is not sort of aware that in the environment the thinner body is better camouflage. So the actual mechanism of producing the variation is random in this regard. Now Darwin didn't know how the variation was produced, and this is because he didn't know about DNA. Now DNA is a complex molecule that stores the recipes for constructing an organism. And therefore changes in DNA, called mutations, can result in new traits. And in later lessons we'll learn how it is that this molecule here can store the recipes for building an organism. But for now it's enough to know that when parents reproduce, they're passing on DNA to their offspring, and any differences in this DNA information can account for these differences in the traits. Now again, the variation is random, so here's one way to look at it. Again, our population of ancestral insects is moving into the stick-like environment. We want to make sure that we understand that the sticks in the environment cannot cause the precise DNA mutations to make the offspring more stick-like. So the environment is not causing helpful variations. But neither can the parents control DNA mutations to give their offspring an advantage. So in this case here, we have some of the insects are moving into the stick environment. It's not that these parents here are sort of somehow controlling the mutations that their offspring will get. So they can't say, well, we're going to be in a stick environment, so we're going to start to have babies that look more like sticks. No, they can't control that. And neither can the parents who end up in the leafy environment. They can't control the traits that their offspring are inheriting. So in summary then, the variation is generated by biological processes without regard to the needs of the species in a certain environment. Good and bad DNA changes are always relative to the environment in which they occur. So there are no absolute good mutations or absolute bad mutations. It depends on the context. In our case, this is a good change in DNA because it provides better camouflage. This would be a bad change in DNA, less camouflage, more likely to be eaten. Now, while variation is random, very important to realize that natural selection is non-random. So this is a non-random process, so we don't want to confuse these two elements of this process of natural selection. The production of the variation is random, but the selection part of it is non-random. So here we have some insects in the leafy environment. It's the predators that are going to be selecting which individuals they're going to have for lunch, leaving behind others that will then make babies in the next generation. That process is non-random. The factors in the environment that cause unequal chances for survival are called selection pressures. So the selection process is non-random. These three individuals do not have equal chances of survival. The ones with the better camouflage have a better chance at surviving. Now, predators must eat the poorly camouflaged individuals for better camouflage to evolve. So every generation, there has to be this selection going on, this non-random selection process, if the whole population is to evolve better and better camouflage. So the selection pressure must be physically interacting with the population, must be taking out some individuals, leaving behind others who will then pass on that favorable trait to offspring. And with new variation, then that trait can improve over the generations. With no predators, body shape, and so camouflage, would not make a difference to survival. The population would not evolve stick-like bodies. If there were no predators, then it wouldn't matter what your body shape was. And if these three individuals have equal chances of survival, then you're not going to get this kind of evolution towards thinner and thinner body shapes because of better camouflage. If predators aren't a factor, camouflage is not a factor, and so you won't get the evolution of that body shape. The selection pressures, the predators in this case, are not trying to cause the evolution of better camouflage in their prey. They are simply trying to eat what they see. And this, again, is sort of an important idea here, because Darwin's going to say that this is a natural process. There's no intelligent mind guiding this. Certainly the predators are not trying to make the insects evolve better camouflage. That would not be in their interest. So we don't want to think along those lines at all. We just want to say that the predators are simply trying to find food and eat food. But the result of that cause and effect process is that the population of insects is evolving better camouflage. Now, we've seen that if there were no predators, we won't get the evolution of camouflage. But likewise, if the trait of camouflage is not hereditary, neither will we get the evolution of good camouflage. So with no heredity, body shape would still make a difference to survival, but the favored trait would not become more frequent in future generations. The population would not evolve stick-like bodies. So let's take this generation here. Again, the 40% individual has the advantage. The 15%er is more likely to be eaten. However, while it is true then the 15%ers are dead and the 40%ers will be parents and make babies, if that 40% trait is not heritable, if it's not based in DNA, can't be passed on, then the next generation is likely to have the same kind of variation as the previous generation. So without heredity, we're not going to get the evolution of thinner and thinner body shapes. With heredity, then the 40%ers will tend to pass on that 40% trait with new variations, sometimes improving on that camouflage. So heredity is the key to preserving the favored traits each generation. Selection is trait-specific. In this case, predators are influencing body shape, but not digestion, efficiency, immune function, or fertility, etc. So we were focusing on predators that were selecting camouflage, body shape, as a means to camouflage. There are lots of other traits that every individual has. In this case, the predators are not affecting those traits. So a specific selection pressure has an effect on some traits and not others. So we'll begin to summarize then. As the most stick-like body shape is non-randomly selected each generation, the trait is becoming an adaptation that is more frequent in the population and can improve with new variations. So let's summarize this natural process. When parents reproduce, they're generating offspring that show variation. That variation is random. Now, there are selection pressures in the environment that are non-randomly selecting which individuals will remain in the population to become parents. The others will perish. So that's a non-random selection process. And then those individuals that remain to become parents will be passing on those favored traits. That's the role of heredity. So the favored traits then are going to tend to increase in future generations because they are overrepresented in the future generations. The others with alternate traits are no longer existing. And when a trait is increasing in the population, that's what we mean by evolution. In time then, pretty much everybody in the population has pretty good camouflage, so it's a species-wide adaptation. And what allowed this adaptation to improve over time was that each generation there's new variation that can build upon the traits of the past generation. There is no goal or end state to evolutionary change, as there is when humans purposely select traits in domesticated plants and animals. Rather, the result of natural selection is simply better adapted species to their local environments. And finally, we should note, as Darwin argued, that there is no intelligence, in a sense, producing these well-camouflaged insects. It is simply a cause and effect process, predators interacting with their prey. So natural selection produces the appearance of design without an intelligent mind. Notice that qualification, an appearance of design. So the special creation believers, the Christians, would have said, well, this is actual design. There was an intelligent mind that thought up this body shape and then produced the body shape to serve a purpose, camouflage. Darwin's arguing, well, they appeared to be designed, but it was a non-intelligent process, a cause and effect process, a natural process. And so this concludes then part 2 of our lesson series on natural selection, and we've introduced some important concepts, and here is a summary of the key points, and you can pause it here to read through them.